Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly discussion series that is hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in association with Unique Voices in Films, U of M Detroit Center, and CMN TV. And today we are very honored that Congressman Andy Levin has made some time from his busy schedule to join us and share his valuable wisdom that I got to hear a little bit when he during what's called the coffee hour, which his administration has with various communities in the Michigan's 9th district. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you.
And so honestly, when we met last time, I was very impressed with the issues that you addressed and how you addressed them. And I felt that the Chaldean community, although everybody really could benefit from you coming and joining us and speaking to our audience. And from doing research about you, although your last name gives it away, but you know, you're very obviously very accomplished. Your bio with all the organizing that you have done over the years and your experience and looking at your background, I'm really curious to hear what influence your dad, which is the former Representative Sander Levin, and your uncle, former U.S. Senator Carl Levin, have had on your career.
All right, well, I will tell you about that. But first, I have to say something. Since we last talked, or I saw you at that meeting, I found out you're like a famous author and a movie. You're going to have a movie coming out. Oh my gosh. I have to get your book, Pomegranate, right? That's your, and you wrote a whole bunch of books.
Yes, this was my 14th book, and you will be in the next book. How about that? Since you
I know, is that good or bad? I don't know if it's a good thing. Anyway, that is so cool. And you're going to have
Thank you. That means so much to me. Thank you so much. Thank you for recognizing that. I really appreciate it.
I read it in the newspaper and I was like, wait, I know that person.
Oh, thank you. And you know, this is what I recognized about you. Like, I've been writing about the Iraqi American experience for over 25 years. I know it might not seem like I could do for that many years, but I have. And I can tell when I am connected with people that have so much experience with certain communities. And that's what I felt from you. And I'm like, we need to hear him out because there's a lot of things that I felt were of value that we need to learn. Like our community, like all other communities has its good and bad. And, you know, we're just kind of trying to make the best of the American dream, really.
Yeah. Well, okay. So it's almost hard to separate out, you know, what I learned from my dad and my mom, I should really point out, and my uncle. I would say that first of all, absolute integrity. I mean, they both served 36 years, my dad in the House, my uncle in the Senate, and they both had political careers before that. And there's not like a little whiff of anything. It's kind of boring, you know, no scandal, no nothing. And that's just who they are. And I think that's incredibly important. You know, that's the first thing. And then family, and this is something that our communities have so much in common, I think, that family is everything, that they, like when I was growing up, we had Sunday dinner every Sunday with my dad and his brother, my Uncle Carl, my Aunt Hannah, who passed away a long time ago, and my Grandma Bess, who, you know, was alive for my whole childhood. And we rotated, and mostly the women cooked, to be honest. But you know,
yeah, this is starting to sound very Chaldean.
You know what I'm saying?
Arab culture, actually, in general, the Jewish Arab and the Chaldean culture, experience, everybody's like that, right?
Yeah, well, and you know,
Italians.
Sexism cuts across all cultures, you know. So
right now,
you know,
we're
the
all
whole thing, like
everybody falls into this category. That's
there were like a lot of the famous chefs were men, but women do 98% of the cooking of the world, you know. So anyway, but I love to cook, and I learned to cook from my mom, who was an amazing cook. So it's not just the men. And then I would say the final thing I'll mention is just really being serious about politics. I mean, I'm sorry, about policy. it's not like about showboating around. It's about, what do the people need? What would really make a difference? What, what could give people a better chance in the world? Where are there injustices? So I'd say those are the things that I learned from my dad and my uncle, who I have to say are, still here. They're both retired. They didn't become lobbyists or something. They both live right. Carl lives downtown and Dad lives in Royal Oak, right in the district that he represented. And I talk to both of them all the time. And imagine this, there's got to be no other of the 435 representatives and 100 senators. There can't be one who has the richness of advisors they can call anytime that I have. So I'm super grateful for my dad, my uncle.
Yes, and I've met your uncle in person, and they're very approachable. He was very approachable, and he helped the Chaldean community during issues that they had during that time. But I was interested to know, like, how did this influence lead to you running in 2018 for the House of Representatives in Michigan's 9th Congressional District?
Well, I would say more it influenced me to run away from running for office. So I was 58 when I ran for Congress. And if you have, a dad who was my dad was the state chair of the Michigan Democratic Party when I was little. He was the state Senate minority leader. He was the Democratic candidate for governor when I was 10 and 14. And then Carl became a US Senator when I was 18. My reaction, to be honest, was, and maybe as an artist, you can relate to this. I mean, politics is kind of yucky. It's a lot about compromise. I was a very passionate kid. I still am a passionate kid. Can I say that? But I was pretty radical, really. I mean, I wanted a beautiful world that why shouldn't we have a beautiful world? Why shouldn't we have full equality? Why should immigrants have so much problems? So I decided when I graduated from college not to go into politics, but to become a union organizer. And I spent most of my life basically helping working people form unions or get their rights. I became an attorney. I got involved in human rights work. I learned to speak Haitian Creole and Tibetan along the way. And I, got involved in human rights in those countries and others. And I got into clean energy and the kind of environmental transformation we need to have. And it was really when Jennifer Granholm was governor. And I mean, to be honest with you, it's partly, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. And it was after the first time I had cancer. I'm all good now, so don't be too, but I got cancer when I was 39.
No, the reason I'm reacting that way, because based on your age and how you look, and I was like, okay, he's got good genes, and I don't know if he's just a kid at heart that these are the good. And then now when you're saying the cancer part, honestly, like on a physical level, that's amazing, because you just look really good for having gone all through that you've gone.
Well, I was lucky. I mean, I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was just super isolated, caught it early, and then 7 years later, it happened again. And the amazing thing was, because of the doctors, I mean, let's celebrate American ingenuity, people from our communities, but Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, people from all over the world come to this country and do medical, experiments and research. So my doctor, Jeffrey Margolis, I'll call it his name, at Beaumont, he said, my oncologist, he said, that first time you had cancer was 7 years ago. You were in DC still then. And he got a slide from my first lymphoma and he compared it to the new one. And he said, they did a DNA footprint or something. And he said, they're unrelated. And I said, unrelated? So I'm supposed to be happy that my body's like popping out a new cancer every 7 years? And he said, dang right you are, because the recurrence is worse, a lot worse. And so 2 times I had it, both times they caught it really early. It's gone. The second time was 14 years ago. So I'm knocking on the wood I have available, But anyway, the point is that when I first got cancer, it makes you first you got to see, well, am I going to live or die, right? But if you're lucky enough to, or, you know, whatever it is that you're not, you know, you're going to be around, I think it changes you. I think you know, to me anyway, I was like, well, you know, you better do what you're put here to do, because you may not be here tomorrow. And I realized that I need to come home to Michigan. And then I became the chief workforce officer. You know, Jennifer Granholm, when she won re-election, hired me. And she said, what am I going to do with all these unemployed people when the auto industry imploded and GM and Chrysler both declared bankruptcy? And so I came home. I've been home ever since. And when I was running a big government agency of state government, I said, you know, this is really what I was meant to do. Actually, I have to admit, you know, I'm not going to run away from my dad and my uncle's legacy, that sometimes the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And whether you own, you know, stores, or you're a farmer, or whatever you are, a lot of times a musician, you know, a lot of times the kids do something similar to the parents. And so in the end, I've gone to Congress. And right now, with all the problems our country faces, I can't imagine doing anything else. This is what I need to be doing for sure.
Well, yeah, because of your history, because of your experience, and what you learned from your family and your educational background and everything else, it's like, it seems like you're utilizing all of that to be of service for your community. And this is, you know, and I was wanting to know, like, how would you describe Michigan's 9th congressional district, and what is the history of the Chaldean community in this district? Because it does have the largest concentration of Chaldeans in Michigan. And Michigan, I know, you know, I've said this before, that now has the largest population in the world. Before, we were second population of Chaldeans in the world. Before, we were the second largest, Iraq being the first. And given all the figures that we were recently provided with, now we're the largest. So you're really
even before Iraq, you're saying.
Before Iraq, before 2014, Iraq had the largest population. We were the second.
But so now we even have more than Iraq, which is
yes. Now we have more than one. Yeah,
that's a huge tragedy.
We were given figures. Yeah, we were given figures that Iraq now has about 150,000, and we have over 160,000. And this is not even for Michigan. It's not even a recent census. It's from the 2010 census.
Yeah. Well, so. First of all, Michigan's 9th district is southeast Oakland and southern Macomb counties. So none of the city and no rural areas. It's all inner suburbs. In Oakland County, it's Bloomfield Township and Southfield Township, which is like Franklin, Bingham Farms, and Beverly Hills, and then all down Woodward, Royal Oak, Berkeley, Huntington Woods, Pleasant Ridge, Ferndale, Madison Heights, Hazel Park, a little bit of Clawson. These crazy gerrymanders, the way they did it. And then all of southern Macomb, to oversimplify, basically Macomb County south of Hall Road. And this district is incredibly diverse, and I just cherish that about it. It's got, you know, people from all over the world. And, you know, there's some wealthier people, but there's a lot of blue collar, middle class families. And it has the most Iraqi-born people altogether, whether they're Chaldeans or Sunni or Shia or whatever, of any congressional district in America. And as you say, the bulk of those in my district are Chaldeans, and I represent more Chaldeans than any other district, not just in Michigan, but in the United States. And it's just an incredible honor and delight, you know, to say that. And the role that the Chaldean community plays in enriching really our whole country, but our state and my district, with the, you know, the community centers and the chamber and the small businesses and the churches. It's just it's really a major part of the fabric of our community. And so it's really just an incredible honor to represent the Chaldean community, to tell you the truth. And I talk about the Chaldean community all the time with all my colleagues, because I'm number one, you know, so I brag about you. Well, I brag about y'all.
Thank you, because we feel like, I often say, you know, we feel like Michigan is our like haven. I mean, we, you know, we were dispersed everywhere, but this is the one place where we have that kind of concentration, and it's the only place when I was trying to do research that has organizations and community centers for Chaldeans, because everywhere else they rely mostly on the church, because the communities in elsewhere are not as established, and so they're not as like populated in one area. They're like different places. So I found out from research that Michigan is the only one that has Chaldean organizations and foundations and such. So yeah, and we are very grateful that we have this kind of place that has like housed us and allowed us to thrive and prosper. So we really appreciate it as well. You co-founded an organization to assist immigrants with challenges posed by Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. What were those challenges and what were the results of your efforts?
Wow, that's a great question. I rarely get asked about that. Our organization was called IRATE, Immigrant Rights, Advocacy, Training, and Education. And the reason we did it was that was the law in 1986 where, and I think this was a huge mistake, if, you know, I disagreed with it, but we put enforcement of immigration laws into the workplace. And I think everybody has to admit that it's been a total failure and a disaster, because you can ask yourself a simple question. Has that law prevented undocumented people from working in America, from being hired, getting jobs? Not at all. You know, and is it really helpful to employers to have to enforce immigration law? You know how you have to fill out an I-9 form whenever you get a job? That's because of Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. That's where that started. Before that, when you think about it, why should a company, somebody who owns a small company, why should they have to help enforce the immigration laws? It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but we have that now. And so when it was passed, we started this organization to help workers. So unions and companies, all of a sudden they might have an immigrant workforce. And how are they supposed to help immigrants who were legitimately there or whatever, even if they're enforce their rights and be able to work and feed their families? And so that it was really about that nexus between immigration law and the workplace that organization was about. And it had a big legacy. I mean, we wrote a lot of contract language for local unions that they negotiated with. You know, the unions and the employers didn't know what to do. So we helped them figure out, what do they need to do under this new immigration law? How could they, you know, have a union contract that protected the employer's rights and the workers' rights under this new law? And that's what we did. That was in Massachusetts. At that time I was living in Boston, and IRATE became part of MIRA, the Massachusetts Immigration Reform Advocates, which is still the leading immigrant advocacy organization in the state of Massachusetts to this day. So we were like a tributary into that stream, basically. And
wow. I never even, you know, there are so many things that you guys do that we're not aware of. I know there's oftentimes more complaints than not, but you realize, like, if we were to nitpick, I had no idea this W-9. I actually just today emailed somebody about this, and we go back and forth with this a lot of times. I never even thought that there was this kind of history to it. I just thought that this was just a natural part of the process, and I never looked into, and then the kind of work that you have to do to try to protect different people in the process.
Well, can I just take a minute to say that anybody watching or listening to this, you know, yes, I am a congressperson. I'm there to pass laws, create new policies. But the other big part of my job is to help people who have any kind of problem with the federal government. And we are doing that constantly, especially about immigration. And so if anybody has a problem, they should call my office at 586-498-7122. I don't know if we could put that in the screen.
Oh, no, you can. I'm just smiling because I'm thinking that, yeah, this is the same type of attitude. This part of what also led to this interview is that when we did have that coffee hour, you were just very open and very encouraging for people to reach out. And I thought, well, this sounds like I'm just, you know, talking to a neighbor that's telling me.
I've got to tell you a story. I got to tell you a story because
okay.
this is the latest thing. Okay. So we just passed in the House the Violence Against Women Act. Again, and I don't know if it can pass the Senate, but it's super important to update that law. And I had a meeting late last year, so not that long ago, that Stephanie and who helped organize this session, and Eleanor Gamalski, my other outreach person, and they're just an amazing team, and we all work together. They set up this meeting with organizations that help women who've been abused, battered, sexually assaulted, whatever. And this one woman told us a story, and it was so harrowing, but the point of it for this purpose is she was brave enough to try to prosecute it, right? Go to the prosecutor. And when she did that, by the time of our meeting, she had 5 different prosecutors assigned to her. I think, so what that means is that 5 times she had to start all over, tell that horrible story. She didn't feel like anybody saw her as a person, was really dealing with her. So she said, do something about it. And I was like, I don't know, what can I do about that? But we will try. Well, when the Violence Against Women Act was coming up, my legislative director in Washington, because Stephanie and Eleanor, there's no boundaries between our DC office and our district office. Kat said, my legislative director said, we could put something in the Violence Against Women Act, and there's a thing called vertical integration, which, in companies means like you control the supply chain right down to the finished product, and even selling that would be like, but in prosecution, it means you get one attorney, one prosecutor who stays with you from intake to the sentencing of the criminal, that hurt you. And so I ran to the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler. I literally knocked on his door in Washington because we have nobody working with us because of COVID. And I found him and I said, Jerry, could we put in the Violence Against Women Act the idea that a prosecutor's office could get a grant to do vertical integration? Because it costs more. Right, to have like one prosecutor stay, you have to organize it different. And we got it in there. And it's part of what we passed. That's why when I'm not kidding around when I say talking to the members of the Chaldean community about that's why we, introduced legislation to stop the deportation of Chaldeans and other Iraqis, because we try, if you want to be a good legislator, you better, we're a representative, right? We need to represent our community, and you can't represent until you listen.
Yes, and yesterday somebody asked me what my opinion, what the minorities' opinions about the protests happening in Iraq, and I said, because she was having a hard time, I guess, finding people that were sharing their opinions, and I realized that I think that as minorities in Iraq, and given that it's an oppressive country, oftentimes there is some of the attitude kind of trickles down into our Western society. That sometimes we don't see the value of speaking up. We just think, well, the government doesn't care. They're not going to really get. And there's this suspicious attitude, unfortunately, and it's mostly from the older generation. The younger generation, obviously, because you're born here, you go to school here, and you have different learning opportunities. And I was going to actually, this kind of fits into the next question. What you have witnessed has been Chaldean's major challenges in the last 2 decades, since the 2003 U.S.-led invasion. And I was going to ask you, in addition, is how these issues have been dealt with by the U.S. government. But one thing I have noticed, as a journalist myself, I was a reporter for the Chaldean News for over 10 years. And a lot of the stories that I covered had to do with when ICE and the detainment, and also when ISIS overtook the northern part of Iraq, the 2003 war, when actually Senator Carl Levin, he was trying to get Iraqi refugees to come, because of what happened during the war. It was incredibly helpful when I was in the meetings, and he was trying to see how he can help the Chaldean community, and it was in Southfield Manor at the time the meetings were taking place. But one of the things is that I do notice that sometimes when things happen, the reaction is that like the need and the fear and turning towards the government for that. But maybe, I don't know. I mean, in my opinion, given what we're just kind of talking about, is maybe there are things that the Chaldeans could do prior to. And if so, how? How do they voice their opinion? How do they more integrate more with the community, with their communities? Not just with the Chaldeans, because again, because of the fear factor and the things that they've experienced, sometimes they stay in that niche. And so what advice do you have for them? What has been their challenges, and maybe how can they overcome them, and what role has the US government played in all of that?
Wow, well, that's a lot. So first of all, I mean, I was very much against the US invasion of Iraq. I think it was a big disaster, and it set off a chain of events that, has led to huge tragedy for Chaldeans. I mean, there used to be well north of 1.5 million Chaldeans in the plain of Nineveh and wherever throughout Iraq. And Chaldeans, Christians have lived there for thousands of years. And then with, the different Islamist groups and the and terrorist groups that have been there, it's, there's been massive displacement and oppression and a huge exodus, and it's been a tragedy of massive proportions. I was really I watched the Pope's visit to Iraq very closely, and I was very inspired that he went and so forth. But what will be the long-term future for for Chaldeans in Iraq? I don't know. I mean, it's not just Al Qaeda and Daesh. It's the ongoing situation is not easy, and there's been so much violence, destruction of churches, whole villages, cultural sites that are really like crimes against humanity. I would say in terms of and then and then recently here, I mean, the Chaldeans faced during the last 4 years a much greater effort than we saw before to deport Iraqi nationals who'd ever done anything wrong in this country. And we can get into that in detail, but I guess first let me just speak to your question of what can the community do. And I would say that the main thing that the community, first of all, you have to advocate for yourself. But really, the famous quotation from Jewish tradition, if I'm not for myself, who will be? But if I'm not for others, what am I? So I think probably the greatest thing that the Chaldean community could do to educate others about the plight of the Chaldean community, but also the incredible richness of the culture and how fantastic it is. And to gain allies and solidarity is to support other communities and turn out for in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of anti-Muslim sentiment attacks, whatever that happens. Right now, such horrible hatred against Asian Americans, mostly meaning East Asians, South Asians, but with the calling the racist ways that the coronavirus has been called and all that, and it's just led to a lot of tragedy. So the Chaldean community is sort of coming into its own as far as I'm concerned. Here, as you say, there's a very active and thriving business community. There's a chamber of commerce. There's the Chaldean Cultural Center. There's multiple churches that are very vibrant. And I and leadership in the church. I think that the community sort of turning out when there's anti-Semitism for Jews, turning out when there's racist incidents for African Americans, or anti-immigrant stuff, really it builds relationships, I think, and it builds sympathy for your cause when you show sympathy for other people. So that's one thing I think that could be done.
It's very important, and it kind of leads, because some of the other questions you have answered, they're kind of in similar areas, but like one of the things that sort of answers this question is, what have been your observations about the tensions that have stemmed between Arabs and Chaldeans, particularly after ISIS attacked the northern part of Iraq? So to me, the sad part about that, I was born in Baghdad, and I was born amongst, I was a minority Christian among a Muslim community. But the feelings there during that time, it was more of a political nature, not of a religious nature. And of course, there's always the discrimination factor that you will see anywhere. So the sad part for me is that I grew up among Muslims, and that was not an issue. Our neighbors were like, one neighbor in particular was like my mom, and her daughter was like my best friend, and we were across from each other. She was Muslim, I'm Christian, and we never looked at that, and then over years, it seems like when you get older, you start seeing all these differences. And so when this happened, especially for people that were not born there, who did not have these kind of relationships, it's kind of hard to show them that this is not, you cannot like base a whole community based on what happened with ISIS. So we're trying, to educate people about that, especially, like I said, the ones that are born here, sometimes it's even harder. But I guess what you just said is so important, that for us, not only to advocate for ourselves, but also to understand other people's situations that are experiencing similar things, but in different ways.
Yes, well, I have to say, I have run into this over and over, and I've also seen, both here and abroad. So I'll give you two very different kind of examples. So I used to help workers form unions and nursing home workers. And when I was organizing in Boston, a large number of the nursing home workers were Haitian immigrants. And I would go do house visits. I would visit the workers when they were off work and see if they were, wanted to support the union and forming a union. And it was very hard because their boss would try to stop them. And, so anyway, the reason I mention this is I might go to a house of an African-American worker and they might say something negative. I won't go into it, but pretty yucky things about Haitian workers. And then my next house visit might be a Haitian American, immigrant, and she might say something negative about African Americans. These are two Black people working in a nursing home. As a Jew, I played every day with all, I was the only Jewish, we were the only Jewish family in Berkeley, Michigan when I was growing up. And there was one Chaldean family, and that was the diversity. Seriously, I still am in touch with her. She was from kindergarten on. But anyway, and Miss Tuma was my kindergarten teacher. And I had no idea what a Chaldean was, but that was interesting. But here's the point. Kids I played with would say horribly anti-Semitic things, and they got it from their parents. They didn't know better. So I think that there's all this way of people othering each other and turning each other into sort of, it's you have to sort of dehumanize someone and not see them as an individual and turn them into some stereotype or something. And this is what we have to fight against. But look, I'm really into the specifics of, like, for example, the fight to stop the deportation of Chaldean men, almost overwhelmingly, who ever did anything wrong in this country. I think it's a great, I try to educate non-Chaldeans about this all the time. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for, Chaldean folks to reach out and say, wow, really listen to people in the African-American community, Jewish community, Muslim community, whatever, and say, well, tell me about your issues. And then say, well, by the way, guess, what's happening to us. And it's a very sympathetic thing. You know, if you tell them, well, there's a guy in our community who shoplifted or broke into a garage or did something wrong, like when he was 18 or 20, you know, or had a drug habit or something. And now he's like a 52-year-old middle-aged guy with kids working and paying taxes, and he did his time or whatever. And all of a sudden, you know, during the last presidency, they wanted to pick him up and deport him to Iraq. And he came here when he was 2. He doesn't speak Arabic or, you know, whatever that's a pretty powerful story. The idea that that family might be ripped up. But I think, you know, actually sharing your own problems or issues builds relationships too. I just think that I think the Chaldean community is so fantastic, and it's in, you know, getting together with other folks and learning about their issues and being supportive of them. You can't believe how far that can go. I think it's just amazing. And
Yes, and
yeah.
I like really what you're saying, how when you're going into different homes and people are kind of like one kind of talking about the other and then stereotyping people. And my last question is this, because I really do respect and honor what you're saying with regards to different communities and diversity. And you sound like such a peacemaker when it comes to these areas. It's like probably the Buddhism and that teaching. So I really like your philosophy. And so my last question is, because it does seem like sometimes there's a hang up over labels. And, you know, like we're trying to, there's an attempt in the United States to stop racism and discrimination towards certain groups. But sometimes is that kind of causing discrimination other types of groups? Like, for instance, we're considered Christian whites, Chaldeans, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being Christian. There's nothing wrong with being white or anybody. But because of the little bit of the political climate, it feels like if you're put into that category, if you check off that box, then you have the white privilege type of, again, more labels. And my concern with that is that I was born in as a minority Christian here. I came here as a minority Middle Easterner. So it was a population of Christians, but I was so I've tasted all types of minority status, and as a woman to top it off. And I can tell you, I've had people from Black to red, Native Americans call themselves red, to, you know, Asians, whites, being so supportive to make sure, seeing where I came from, to make sure from the time that I was a child, really to help me integrate and assimilate to this country. And so I feel like when we are sometimes putting labels on some people, you know, it just feels like maybe it's inaccurate. How can we kind of I know this is a huge question, and Crystal was telling me there's no answer to that, and she's right, but you know, maybe it's just as simple as what you just said, is just look at each person as a human being. You know, like if I don't know what your background is and I didn't know what you look like, you know, you could be a Christian, you can be a Christian white, and I look like I could be a Muslim, you know, Arab, and nobody can tell that difference. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's the answer, but I just, honestly, like I would love to have you leave with those words just as a message, I think, for everybody that is experiencing this right now, no matter what their color is.
Yeah, well, that's such a great point and so important. I would say, you know, I get in trouble with everybody because people are, you know, like I speak up for minorities in India, and I've spent a lot of time in India, and I was studying Buddhism, as you say, but I did a year in college there, then I did graduate study there. And I'm very mad at Narendra Modi, and I feel like he's a Hindu nationalist, and I'm like a Bharatawala, you know, I love India. I'm an India-phile, and I don't care if he's the president. I think he's going in the wrong direction. India is the biggest democracy in the world. And why we love it is it's a secular democracy where Muslims and Jains and Buddhists and other minorities were welcome. And like you said, like I lived in Benares, and if you wanted to eat meat, you went to the Muslim quarter there, because, you know, there was not a lot of problems between Hindus and Muslims then. And now there is. And, you know, I'm Jewish, and I'm a Zionist. I love Israel. but I speak up for Palestinians, and that makes some of the Jewish people mad at me, like I should be tribal or something. Well, I'm not. I'm totally for Israel as a safe, democratic homeland for the Jewish people, but there's no way to actually achieve that without respecting Palestinian political rights too. But here's how I want to answer your question. I know the way not to accomplish what you're talking about, and that is the idea of color blindness. You know, the idea that let's just not look at difference. Let's just act like it's not important or it doesn't exist, or like the way to treat everyone equally is to not essentially be interested in your particularity or my particularity. That is really not true. Like in this country, we'll never get beyond racism by pretending we're colorblind, because we've baked into the whole system structures that are discriminate against Black people, and we have to see those and take them apart, you know? So I think that the way to do it, and maybe this is more of an artist way than a writer way than a politician way, you know, is to really, but we all have a role to play, is to say, wow, tell me about the Latinx community. Wait a minute. Don't say Colombians and Argentinians and, you know, people from Dominican Republic are the same. They're fiercely different. You know, let's celebrate the particularity, the languages, the cultures, the food. You know, let's lean into the diversity and celebrate it and see it, not try to erase it, but see it and say, because like, just like you said, you know, people say, well, you're a white woman, you know, white Christian woman. Well, Jews, it's kind of funny for us to be considered white people. We weren't, I mean, the deed to this house I'm sitting in Bloomfield Township, has a crossed off thing that you can't sell the house to Blacks and Jews. It was in the deed of my house that I bought. And it wasn't very long ago that it was not crossed out, you know? So these things change, but I think instead of like seeing big groups and, you know, I think what I'm into is let's have the whole world appreciate Chaldean culture and language and cuisine and literature, you know, everything. And then some of these way people paint each other with broad brushstrokes, which can be hurtful and not lead to justice, you know, maybe we can move away from some of that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the way I feel.
No, actually, it does. It does. It sounds to me like a healthy way to deal with something, and it sounds pretty fun and easier than than ignoring it, because it seems like when we're ignoring it, the people that want to be heard are just trying harder to be heard, and then the tension grows and the issues continue. So actually, it sounds simple and it sounds fun, and all we got to do is just apply it, right?
Yes.
All we have to do is apply it. Thank you so much. Thank you. I know you have, like I said, you have a very busy schedule, so we really appreciate your time, and we will be making sure that if there is something that we will contact you, since you've made yourself.
Please do. Yeah, please do. And it's
Thank
so
you.
great to have this chance to chat with you.
Thank you for everything that you do for our district and for the country. Thank you
so much. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.